Well, hey there, and welcome to After the Sermon. My hair is doing crazy things today. I wanted to talk to you about the location of the Garden of Eden. That's what we're talking about today. So, it's been kind of a crazy week, so I'm posting a little bit late this week. But we're walking through Genesis, and we're unpacking some of the theological things that we find there, and we're kind of taking our time and unpacking it. And so if you haven't had a chance to listen to some of the messages and you want to, you can go to Park Hill Baptist YouTube page or to mine. I've got them linked there as well on this channel. But one of the questions that came up as we were kind of walking through it was, where is the Garden of Eden? Where's it located? Could you go there today? Could you go Indiana Jones style and go find the Garden of Eden? It's a good question. So let's talk about that today on After the Sermon. So for centuries, people have searched for the Garden of Eden. Some have, kind of speculated different areas where they thought it might be. Is it in Mesopotamia? Is it in Armenia? Is it in, a region in Turkey? Is it, where's it at? Some Mormons have claimed, as Joseph Smith did, it's in Missouri. One guy who was the president of Boston University said, well, maybe it's in the North Pole. Okay. So those are options. They're maybe not good ones, but they are options. But let's just think about it for a minute. And I want us to talk about what we see in the text and then maybe unpack some things. So I want us to we're going to look at the Bible. We're going to look at the text. I want us to look at a view proposed by a guy named John Walton, who wrote a commentary on Genesis. And then another scholar named John Selhammer, who I think can give us a good perspective on some of the theological reasoning behind the location of the garden. Okay, so let's look at the text, and we're going to do this kind of rapid fire. I know no one really wants to sign up for a super long video, so we'll try to make it short. So we're in Genesis chapter 2, looking at verse 8. Here's what it says. The Lord God planted a garden in Eden. Now, important to note, the garden is going to be referred to as the Garden of Eden later on in Scripture and other places. But here, notice, there's a region known as Eden. Okay, it could be a large region, could be a small, we're not told, but it's a region. And within that region, God plants a garden, referred to as the Garden of God. This is the source of life. This is where this is going to be his home base. This is the temple of sorts. This is the place where God is going to meet with humanity. This is his garden. This is his royal palace, if you want to call it that. This garden is the place where God is going to meet with humanity. From that place, humanity is going to be given the task to be fruitful, multiply, spread the garden throughout the earth. Okay, make the whole earth, just like the water covers the sea, the garden of God, basically. That's going to be humanity's task. But they're planted in a region known as Eden, in the east, and there he placed the man he had formed. Now, that phrase, in the east, is really difficult to translate. It can be translated as in the olden times. It can be translated as eastward, facing eastward, that kind of idea. So it's really difficult to translate what that means. All right, so there are different opinions on that. And so we may be another video, we could talk about that if it comes up. But so we don't want to put too much stock in just our interpretation of that phrase, but we can come back to that if we need to. Okay, so there he placed the man he had formed. The Lord God caused to grow out of the ground every tree pleasing in appearance and good for food, including the tree of life in the middle of the garden. So God is going to produce food. He's the source of nourishment and food for his creation, for humanity, as well as the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. So there's this other tree. We'll talk about those two trees when we get to chapter 3. We'll talk more about the details of the trees there in the garden. But let's move on. So verse 10, a river went out from Eden to water the garden. From there it divided and became the source of 4 rivers. So here we have some geography. So we've got a river that flows from the garden, and it branches out into 4 different rivers. Now, it's important to note that in an ancient Hebrew mind, ancient people, not just Hebrews, They understood the world differently than we do. If we said, describe the earth, they would not have a view from space looking at a globe. They would have a view of a human looking out at creation from earth, right? That's their perspective. We live in a post-space world. So for them, as God reveals the nature of reality, he's not changing their cosmology. He's not saying, oh, by the way, there's a moon out there, you're all orbiting around the sun. None of that's happening. God is revealing basically himself in the way that they understand it. So for them, they understood the world as flat. Underneath it was the deep waters. Sheol is down there, and these waters would, at certain places, burst up, and they would be the source of rivers and different things on the earth. So for them, Eden was the source of these rivers. Okay? It was the source of basically water for the whole known world. That's what's being said here. So then he's going to list the 4 rivers. The first is the Pishon, which flows from the entire land of Havilah, where there's gold. Gold from the land is pure. Bdellium and onyx are also there. So that's the first one, the Pishon. The second river is the Gihon, which flows through the entire land of Cush. Now that's important. We'll come back to that. The name of the third river is the Tigris, which runs east of Assyria. And the fourth river is the Euphrates. Okay, so we've got these 4 rivers. 2 of them, we know where they are. If we look at a map, you can see the Tigris and the Euphrates. They still are in existence today. And so we know generally where they are. Now, interestingly, the 2 rivers that we know the most about in our day are the 2 rivers that the biblical author says the least about. He says, the Tigris and the Euphrates. So what do we make of this? So some have said, well, because these are the 2 rivers we know, maybe the Garden of Eden was down in kind of the southeastern area, kind of in that Babylonian area. Maybe that's what it's referring to, because that's where those 2 rivers kind of are close and it may be connected. Others have said, no, it's probably further upstream, maybe more in the mountainous region, eastern Turkey, that kind of area. But let's talk for a minute about 2 views that I think will help give some clarity for this. All right, so first, John Walton's view. Now, Walton makes the case, and I think he does a good job of making it, that in Genesis 1, God is describing, or the biblical author is describing the creation of the universe. So the heavens and earth are created, but he's not necessarily talking about just the creation of physical stuff. He's talking about how God is organizing it into the world we have today. So he sets the stars and the moon and the sun in the sky for the seasons. He separates the water and the land so that humanity has a place to live. He grows food and those sort of things. So while God is the maker of all the stuff, God is organizing and giving it purpose. So Genesis 1 is not just giving us a scientific textbook. In the same way, Genesis 2 is not giving us a geography lesson. It's telling us about the nature, the theological nature of the Garden of Eden. That's Walton's point, is that even if we could find the exact location, the point is not that we would go back to Eden, but it's that what Eden represents. So there's symbolic imagery here that's ultimately going to point to something much bigger. So what is that thing? What is it that it's pointing to? Well, it's pointing basically that God is the source of life, that all the rivers flow out of Eden. So when we think about the Garden of Eden, even though we may not know, well, where was it? Walton says it's not as important where it is. What's important is that you realize what it means. And what it means is that God is the source of life. And that's not to discount that it was an actual place, in an actual location, in an actual time. It's simply to say, what does it mean? That was a more important question to them. So Walton will say something like, the geography used here is not topographical geography, but it's cosmic geography, right? So it's giving us a theological meaning behind the imagery. So the River of Eden, the water that flowed out of Eden, was the place where God dwelled. Okay, he was in the garden meeting with his people. Now we know, and ancient Israelites would have understood, God was everywhere, but this was the place where heaven and earth were coming together. This was the temple-like area. Okay. So what about the other two areas, or the other two rivers? Well, I think this is where Selhammer, the other theologian, can help us out. So the first one, the Pishon, he's as lost as anybody, right? So he's like, well, we don't have any good information about the Pishon. Some have said it could be kind of in Jerusalem, that area. It could be in the Canaan area. There's some evidence that Havilah may be in that region, so that's possible. But we just don't have enough good information. But the Gihon, we do have a little bit more information about that. One example, it kind of helps us understand this, is it mentions the land of Cush, which the land of Cush is basically Egypt. It's that whole area along the Nile River, that region. And so if that name, the Cush, is the same as we understand, then the river, the Gihon, would be kind of that Nile River, that area. There's also another clue into this. So in Jeremiah 2:18, it talks about the water of the Nile, and the Hebrew says the Shahor, or the Nile. Okay, so in the Hebrew, the word is Shahor, which we translate as Nile, but the Septuagint translated as the water of the Gihon, and so it correlates the Gihon and the Nile together. So those two things so that's just some evidence that maybe the Gihon is the Nile, or at least some representation of it. So if we look at our map again, we don't know where the Pishon is, but we know we've got the Euphrates, we've got the Tigris, and now the Gihon, if that is in fact the Nile River. And what's fascinating about this, and this is Selhammer's view, is that we have the Nile, or the Gihon, and we have the Euphrates, and this is exactly the description that God gives to Abraham when he talks about the promised land. So in Genesis chapter 15, verse 8, he says, "On the day that the Lord made a covenant with Abram, saying, I give this land to your offspring, from the brook of Egypt to the great river, the Euphrates River." And then he lists all the peoples that live in that land. So from the river of Egypt to the Euphrates, I give you this land. He's talking about the land of Canaan. And it's the same description that we see of Eden, the waters flowing out from it. And so Selhammer's view, and it's fascinating, is that he thinks that Eden represents, or is symbolic or pointing to, the future promised land. That the region of Eden is the land of Canaan, the promised land, where Israel would ultimately live. And that the Garden of Eden is kind of a headwater for that humanity was supposed to spread the garden of God through the promised land and ultimately to the ends of the earth. Be fruitful, multiply, and fill it to the ends of the earth. So it's fascinating to me that there's so much theology wrapped up in the location of Eden, even though we may want to understand, okay, where is it at? Could we go there today? The Bible talks about in Genesis 3, after they're removed from the garden, they go east, right? They go east out of the garden. And then when Cain kills Abel, he goes east. And over again, from Genesis 1 all the way to Genesis 3 through Genesis 11, when they sin, they're going east, 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 until finally they end up at the Tower of Babylon. And at Babylon, God is going to disperse the nations. And so there's this movement eastward to Babylon, which will become the great conqueror of Israel later in its history. But God is constantly redeeming and wanting to draw them out. So once we get to Jesus, Jesus becomes that new Garden of Eden, right? So he becomes the source of life. He says, I am the life, I am life, I am resurrection. He becomes the source of life. And he promises that anyone who believes in him, they will experience new life. They'll never die again. Just like the tree of life in the garden, they'll never die because they trust in him. Once we get to the book of Revelation, it says that God is going to make the new heavens and new earth, and in it will be the tree of life. He's going to recreate the garden, and the whole universe will be the abode of God. So when we think about the Garden of Eden, we may be tempted to, put on our Indiana Jones hat and, take our bullwhip and try to find it. But I don't think we would find anything special there now, even if we found it, if we knew the exact location. Why? Because God's plan is ultimately not that we would live in a garden, but that we would live in his presence and that his son, Jesus, would be the source of that life. So where's the garden? Well, ultimately the garden is the church, because that's where Jesus is. And so we are called by God to care for it, to protect it, and to extend it, to tell others and to help other people know about the goodness of God. So, good questions, and I think we need to wrestle with these things. But at the end of the day, it really, as most things, comes back to Jesus. So hopefully this has been an encouragement to you. I do think there's a lot of interesting things that we could talk about as far as how the Garden of Eden, Genesis 1 and 2, kind of connect to later Israel and the Promised Land. And we'll be looking at those things as we walk through Genesis. But if you have some questions, or maybe you have a thought about the location, or anything, please leave a comment. Feel free to subscribe if you want to get updates whenever we post new videos. And share this with a friend, and we would love to be able to connect with them as well. So with that, I'll sign off, and next week I plan on doing a few videos around Genesis 2 and 3, looking at some of the questions. But if you're reading through the text and you've got questions, things that you would like to just have a little bit of explanation about, I'm not setting myself up as the Bible answer man. I'm not that smart. What I can do is study the material, try to synthesize some of it down, and try to unpack some of it for you, give some things that might be helpful. Really, ultimately, that's what I want to do, is just be helpful. So if this is helpful, great. If it's not, no worries. But I just want to be helpful for you. It also helps me to kind of, clear the mechanism, kind of get, as I'm wrestling through things, kind of get it on tape and on tape. Do people even use tape anymore? Get it recorded, and then I can, kind of move on. So anyway, I'm rambling. I'm going to sign off. We'll talk to you later. God bless. Have a great week.